One of the most urgent tasks for our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday, and this is the best day of the week. Not just because the weekend is almost here, but because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcast the Climate Realism Show, and this is episode number 214 for those of you scoring at home. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm your host and executive vice president of the Heartland Institute. We are an organization that has been around for 42 years, and we are known as the leading global think tank, pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bringing the data, the science, the truth that counters the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will do us a favor and bring friends to view this live show every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And also like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to leave your comments underneath this video. All of these very simple tasks help convince YouTube's very mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program. And that gets the show in front of even more people. And as a reminder, unfortunately, Big Tech is not a big fan of the way we cover energy and climate policy on this program. So Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support the program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. And you can join other friends of this program from literally all around the world who help bring the show to the world every single week. And before we get started, we want to thank our streaming partners who also help extend the reach of this program. JunkScience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and our friends at Heartland UK Europe. Let's get started. We have a big show today. Today, we actually do have with us Sterling Burnett, but not in this particular moment in time. Sterling Burnett is doing a radio hit with the Andy Caldwell Show out in California, talking about, well, the convergence of opposition to AI data centers and climate alarmism. He'll be joining us probably about halfway through the show. He is, when he gets here, the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center for Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. We also do not have Anthony Watts, who is a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute. He is off today, and I thought I told him no PTOs on Fridays, but I guess he didn't get the memo. He'll be back again at a future program. And also, Linnea Lukin is also not with us. I know this is extremely disappointing, but
No.
What?
No.
that's right. She's actually doing a tour. She's in Israel at the moment. Maybe we'll show a picture of her. She just sent us this morning, actually. She's having a great time. But I also want to thank our producers, Andy Singer and Silas Pearson, who are working behind the scenes to make sure this show looks and flows great. And thank you, Andy, filling in for me. Yes, I did have to miss a Friday show as well. So, yeah, that is life. So I would like you to introduce you guys to our two fantastic guests today, who will also be joined by Sterling pretty soon. One is Craig Rucker. He's the president of CFACT. And we'd also like to welcome for the first time to the show, Marlo Lewis, an old friend of us and at the Heartland Institute, and to just about everybody important in the climate realism movement. And he's a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. And actually, Jim, it's good to be back.
Were you on the show before and I just forgot?
Yeah, but that's okay.
Oh. Well, gosh, it must have been too long ago.
It was too long ago, but yeah, and it was hosted by Sterling and Anthony.
Well, then it doesn't really count.
And then I was, okay. And then I think I was on one with Jay Lair. Maybe this is my third time. I don't know.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
Hello, Craig. You had something, you complained to me before we started the program that there was a big important story that was not in the rundown of our stories. And so you're going to have to explain to everybody.
Well, I got to say, I'm a little disappointed. I mean, I know Sterling probably sold you the idea he's on the radio show. I think he's out hunting, adding to the trophies in the back of his wall that he always seems to have. Linnea is a real disappointment. She would have softened it. I mean, we just are stuck now with a bunch of us on the film. And, but as far as the big story of the week, you gave me the lowdown here. I don't see the biggest story of all. I mean, the whole week is really hinged around this one. I think it has climate implications. It's Lake Ontario has been changed to Lake America. And to me, I think in lieu of all of what we're talking about today, that should probably headline everything.
Okay.
Well, think about it. Canada is cold there, right? If Canada's north of us, Lake Ontario is Canadian. So now it's Lake America, and that's moving south. So it's warm. I think just by virtue of the name change, we have global warming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're going to start doing that kind of stuff, I think we should rename the Canadian bacon on the Egg McMuffin to what it really just is, a slice of ham. That's all it really is. Everybody knows.
You serious?
For sure. All right. Well, again, thank you guys for being here. And again, no Anthony, no Linnea. Very disappointing. But Sterling, the Archbishop of Rancherbury, will probably be full for bear when he gets in here about halfway through the show. But as we will start the show, as we always do, with our favorite segment, which is the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you very, very much. Now, the first item in the rundown here, if you're watching on stream, is the tragedy in Nepal, and we are going to get to that, but we're going to wait until Sterling Burnett can be here to help weigh in with the climate implications, or the accusations, I should say, about that horrible, horrible tragedy. But let's start off with something a little bit lighter and definitely crazy. This comes to us. This is the idea that global warming causes child abuse. This is from Psychology Today, and I think it's pretty sick. The author is Joanne Stevlos. It's going to take a little while to set this up, but it'll be worth it. Here we go. She writes, on one of the hottest days of the summer, I went to Target. It seemed as if every parent in town had the same idea. Outside, it was miserable. Inside, there was air conditioning, cold drinks, bathrooms, and enough space to wander around for a while. I remember wondering how many families actually needed something and how many were there just because Target was cool. There was a mother shopping with 4 children, all of them, I guess, under 10. The kids were restless. One complained. Another wandered off. Someone wanted something. She called them back and asked them to please just let her finish shopping. Then I heard her say, shut up. Not please be quiet, not inside voices, just a sharp shut up. I looked over at her. I wasn't trying to correct her. I was hoping to catch her eye and give her that look parents sometimes give each other. This heat, these kids, I get it. She looked right back at me. Her face said, don't you dare. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself. There is a particular kind of shame in knowing you aren't doing your best parenting and having it happen in public where everyone can see. Someone trying to help can make you feel worse, not better. So I left her alone. When she turned away, I made a silly face at the youngest child. He just looked down. I saw the family again in the parking lot. By then, she was trying to wrangle 4 hot, cranky children into a hot car. She was opening the windows, trying to get them into car seats and seatbelts, telling someone to stop hitting their sister. Her voice was much sharper than it had been in the store, and she was crying. I pulled out my phone and searched for a nearby cooling center. I thought I could mention that I was going there as a way to help her and let her save face. Nothing came up in our town. The closest place I could find was almost 40 minutes away, and I couldn't tell whether it was even open. So instead, as I loaded my car, I said, God, this heat is the worst. I hope it breaks soon. She shook her head. Tough day, I asked, tossing a 6-pack of paper towels into the back seat. Youngest has an ear infection. We can't go to the town pool, and our apartment AC is broken. I'm sorry, I said. That's a lot. Okay, I'm going to take a break right here for a minute and say that I'd like to take things that never happened for $500, Alex. That's just my opinion. But the author said this encounter made her wonder if global warming and child abuse are connected. And it turns out, she says, that they are. And I'll just read a little bit more here as she writes, UNICEF has been studying the intersection of climate change and child protection since 2022. The phrase it uses is threat multiplier. Climate change doesn't have to directly cause someone to hurt a child to increase the danger around that child. UNICEF's research describes climate shocks, worsening poverty, food insecurity, and social inequalities, while also weakening some of the family and community systems that protect children. Then I found research looking specifically at temperature and child maltreatment, including a US study. Using Child Protective Services data, they found increases in alleged and substantiated maltreatment involving young children during hot periods. Neglect was the form of maltreatment most sensitive to temperature. And they found some evidence that air conditioning reduced the association. The study has since been peer-reviewed and published online in the Review of Economics and Statistics. Craig, that'll do it for now, for reading all that background. Craig, I want to start with you. Look, it's been peer-reviewed, so there you have it. Global warming causes child abuse, so let's hand over all of our freedom and economic planning to our betters, and we'll do it for the children.
You know, my first reaction, I mean, I've seen this sort of thing before. Linky, first off, I do think the heat has gotten to her head that she would be writing such dribble nonstop. I mean, that whole experience she talked about at the beginning sounded like my childhood. I think that a lot of us in our regular lives experience, you know, all these different ailments that she kind of goes through. But beyond that, I don't quite get the idea. I mean, when it comes down to child abuse, child psychology, this is coming from those who have been pumping climate alarmism for such a long time. I mean, you got school textbooks saying polar bears are dying. You have school textbooks that are telling kids that you may be the last generation. It's your parents' fault. They're the ones drumming up the fear in the kids at the youngest ages, and then turning around in the next breath and saying that they're all alarmed by it, and there's deep psychological harm being caused to the kids. We documented this in our movie Climate Hustle a few years back, where we actually got some of the footage of what they've been teaching kids, and it's atrocious. I mean, they they have whole clubs devoted. I think they're called Earth Guardians or something like that, back in about 2018 or so, where they're just pumping this stuff nonstop, and of course it's causing some fear and alarm in kids. So, you know, how much of this is caused by what's actually around there, and how much of it's being drilled into the kids' heads by the teachers? I think the latter is what's causing much of this this difficulty for kids.
Yeah, Marlo, you got a reaction to that sob story?
Yeah, well, you know, our good friend, the late lamented Patrick Michaels, reviewed a study once by a couple of Italian researchers which attempted to correlate global warming with suicide. And the title of Pat's commentary was, "It's a getting warmer. I'm a gonna kill myself." You know, and this sounds to me like a study just like that. And what's so preposterous is this woman complains that it's terrible when it gets hot out because her air conditioner is broken. Okay, well, maybe she should fix the air conditioner. And furthermore, maybe we should not make energy more expensive and air conditioning refrigerants more expensive so that more people can afford air conditioning. You know, the global warming movement has basically mobilized against air conditioning. Why? Because air conditioners need energy, and energy use causes carbon dioxide emissions. Except if you actually calculate the warming impact of the CO2 emissions from worldwide deployment of air conditioning, which is what they're worried about, and you actually use their numbers, the increment of the additional global warming from the air conditioner emissions is so small that you couldn't even detect it. However, the air conditioning would in fact protect billions of people from hot temperatures, whether due to global warming or just the plain old summertime.
Yeah, when I first came across this story, and this is actually, unfortunately, Sterling isn't here for it, but he suggested this for the Crazy Climate News segment on today's show, was that if there are so many studies, and Linnea has talked about this on the program, we all have, that you will not get funding for your study if the conclusion of your study is that global warming really doesn't have an effect on this. That's how you get these things. But so when I read this, I thought, oh my gosh, there must be a national crisis of child abuse in India and Indonesia and Myanmar and all these countries that live in very hot areas where the percentage of air conditioning units in where people live is probably infinitesimally small compared to the United States. So if global warming causes child abuse, it is very dangerous to be a child in Southeast Asia, in most Southeast Asian countries, I'd imagine.
You got to wonder just how much money the other side has. I mean, I've seen studies. All right, this is child abuse, a little more serious topic, but I've seen it with barroom brawls increasing from climate change. Studies on this, actually. I've seen it with increases of prostitution. I've seen, there are boatloads of studies that are similar to this. And I just wonder who in the world has this source of money that they can actually get down and bankroll this. We produced a study in the recent weeks about where the Green Climate Fund is going. And it's astounding to me how much of the Green Climate Fund goes to projects that would be either psychological in nature or dealing with, trans issues. And they're not really funding projects necessarily that actually put things on the ground that are supposed to suck up carbon or actually reduce emissions. So a boatload of this seems to me to be transparent, that the left is realizing the climate clamor and the interest in climate change is waning. It's certainly not a top issue among voters and that. How do we get it there? We say it's hurting the children. We say it's, causing more prostitution. We say it's increasing bar fights. We say that it's, your beer will be expected. Good Lord, we got to get Bubba in charge. So, beer will degrade. And there's actually been studies on that as well. So, this just seems like another long list of things that they try to connect it to drum up public concern and alarm about an issue that people have a waning interest in.
Yeah, there's a comment here from a frequent watcher, engineering guy, whose real name is Bob. Sorry, you're not going to get doxxed. There's a lot of guys named Bob. Don't worry about it. He puts up here in the comments, let me see if you can find it. Yeah, he says, how many cities would not exist if it weren't for air conditioning? Well, Phoenix, Arizona would probably still be a sleepy town of about 20,000 people at most if they did not have air conditioning. In fact, most of the, of course, American Southwest only boomed because of air conditioning. But again, with this study, how are people supposed to take this seriously? Or how do they expect people to take it seriously? Because you don't have to be a scientist or work at a think tank to just have your mind logically go, if warm temperatures, hot summers make child abuse more prevalent, then how miserable were the lives of every child born before, I don't know, around 1912? When was air conditioning invented? Early 20th century. And everybody seemed to be okay. It's just look, Marlo and I, right before we came on air, I was born in New York City and left it when I was about to turn 8 years old. And we had one air conditioning unit in our apartment. There were some pretty hot summers in the 1970s, and we had an air conditioning unit in our apartment. My parents put it in their master bedroom because it was important for them to get a good night's sleep. The hell with the kids. We were burning out there. We were boiling in our beds. But I don't remember I wasn't abused, but also I just remembered actually enjoying the heat as a kid. You'd go outside, and on those really, really hot heat wave times, they would look the other way as you crack the fire hydrant open to dance in the streets and cool off with the water. So I don't know. It reminds me, guys, of that list. I think Anthony Watts and others have curated it of all the things that global warming makes worse. And it's a list of literally 1,000 or 2,000 things that some study or some news article somewhere said is worse because of global warming or climate change.
Well, something else here, the point of all these studies that, global warming makes acne worse, whatever it is to somehow motivate opposition to fossil fuels and force America to join the European Union or go back to the Biden administration and make net zero by 2050 the whole of government objective and the national policy. And what would happen is that the U.S. economy would, according to, let's say, one study by proponents of this matter, it's called Wei Peng et al., and they were looking at what kind of carbon tax it might take to actually achieve net zero emissions. And it would basically be a cost of about $4.4 trillion a year by 2050, which would translate into about $13,000 per person in the United States. And we would all be so poor, no one could afford air conditioning. And most people would not even be employed. And we would be much more vulnerable to all the heat stress that occurs naturally, let alone that would be added, to some extent by global warming. And so they're using this to build support for a policy that would make everything worse, including the irritation that certain mothers feel during the hot summers, and the children who might get a back of the hand from an irritated parent.
Oh my gosh, he is here. He
I'm
graces
here.
us with his presence. H. Sterling Burnett, PhD. Welcome, Sterling.
Oh, good to be back on. I guess I missed part of the story about the how climate change is causing child abuse. That never happened before. I know all children was safe before the planet warmed by an average of 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. We haven't seen rising rates, as far as I know, of child abuse here in Texas. And I often brag about Texas. I say 100 degrees. That we call that summer. Well, for about going on 3 weeks now, we've had temperatures that range. I don't think we had a single day that's been under 104. We've had a couple that have gone to 107. They have felt like 111 to 117 because of the heat index, the humidity. Even for Texas, that's warm. Even for Texas, I'm willing to admit, even for Texas, that's warm. And yet I've not seen a single story on the news about cases of child abuse rising.
Well, I thought 100 degrees was called April in Texas, but
well, sometimes, but like I said, summer. This is a little bit warmer, and I'm not saying it's climate change. I'm saying that we're having a warmer than average summer. That's just the data. Sometimes we've had it like that before. We still haven't passed. I think the record was 54 days of straight more than 100-degree temperatures. Something on the order of 60 days with no rain. Where I'm from, we're not there yet, but it's pretty hot. And yet I look out my windows and I see none of the children in my block being beaten. I haven't seen the police roll up in my neighborhood and arresting people for child abuse. This is just one more. Climate change causes everything bad. Even if the bad thing was happening before there was climate change, it's causing it. And, next thing you'll know, climate change will cause spousal abuse. Oh, wait, I've already seen those stories. Oh, climate change will cause more snow in the Antarctica. Oh, wait, I've seen those stories. How warmer temperatures causes more snow. But the point is, climate change causes everything. That's why it was to be fair, a brilliant catch-all for environmentalists to try and restrain human progress, for misanthropes to try and restrain human progress, is making the mere fact of a changing climate, which has always happened, to be a bad thing, and humans responsible.
Sterling, of course, from Texas, hot summers. You just mentioned Jim and Marlo, New York City, hot. I grew up in Buffalo. We did not have hot summers, and we were more afraid of the ice age. So, for us, we would be one of those cities that remained if they got rid of air conditioning. Buffalo would still be around. We never had it when I was growing up. Now, of course, that may change. Now that Lake Ontario is Lake America, maybe that means it will get warmer up there and we'll experience some of the warming effect that you guys experienced. But I just can't identify.
A very serious point here, though, is that the more these researchers attempt to attribute misbehavior, especially by adults, to circumstances beyond their control, the more likely we are to get that kind of misbehavior. Oh, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do it. I didn't beat up my little kid because he wanted a second helping of ice cream. It was climate change that made me do it. And we're seeing that kind of evasion of responsibility all too often today. And this sort of sociological, environmental determination of human behavior just gives people a more permission to evade responsibility.
Well, look, George Soros has already so damaged the prosecuting attorneys across America, letting murderers go for various reasons. But we've had a long decline in personal responsibility in the legal system, excusing bad behaviors for whatever reasons for a few decades now. This is just one more reason for a creative attorney to go into court and say, "Don't convict my client. It was hot outside." And it was hot because that guy over there was driving an automobile and the lady on the jury was running her power. How can she convict my client of something bad when it's their fault?
I got to be candid. I mean, I don't know if it's true with you, Joe. Maybe I just lead a dysfunctional life, but I mean, that whole story was kind of boring to me at the beginning because it really sounded to me like, my life. I mean, I get in the car, air conditioning's not working. My one kid punches the next kid. I'm not really sure any of these things that are going on there. I was going like, yeah, I had that back in the 70s when I grew up too. So I don't know. It struck me as a real stretch when I was listening to that diatribe that he was saying that there was anything particularly not experienced by many people. But again, maybe I could identify because my life was different. But it
was from psychology.
It could have been a country western song. These are the things that country western songs are made of,
Yeah. Well, it was from Psychology Today, so that's a whole other show, I think. But I think the children of Texas need to be forewarned that if you ride your bicycle across Sterling Burnett's front yard, you are taking your personal safety. You're putting that at risk because now he has a ready excuse to, let's just say, get you off that yard. All right. Let's move on to our next item here. This is actually some really good news, and there's actually two components to this story. And this is that the White House is ditching climate doom. This comes to us from the Daily Wire. Headline: White House ditches outdated climate nightmares for real-world policy. The White House is ditching outdated guidelines based on worst-case climate scenarios, the Daily Wire can report first. The U.S. Global Change Research Program is set to publish an amendment to the 5th National Climate Assessment on Tuesday. That's this week, a couple days ago. An amendment clarifying that the U.S. government's congressionally mandated report on climate change impacts and risks is now retired. That report was published in 2023 and was based on the worst-case scenarios for climate change, not actual scenarios that the world is facing. It is a significant move, given that the report massively affects economic and regulatory rules, federal research and grant funding, and the budgeting of millions of dollars and infrastructure misallocation. Planning for dramatic climate change can impact how local governments build power grids, enforce zoning, build seawalls, and more. With this new amendment, the White House is instructing agencies that any findings or projections that are specifically based on worst-case scenarios should include disclaimers or warnings that they originated this way. The White House will also prohibit worst-case scenario projections from serving as the baseline prediction for funding decisions or regulation or infrastructure decisions. Now, who do we have to thank for this? None other than friend of Heartland and friend of this show and past guest, Matt Wielicki. He's the new director of the U.S. Global Change Research Program. I'll read a little bit more here from the story that explains that. Dr. Matthew Wielecki, the director of the USGCRP, explained what the move is intended to ensure: that the federal government's principal climate assessment, quote, reflects current scientific understanding, unquote. Tuesday's announcement brings back the national climate assessment into a scientific realm that is plausible, he said, and not scenarios that were totally implausible, as the scientific community now admits. Quote, this all changed in April of this year when the climate community admitted that the high emission scenarios were no longer plausible, realistic futures, Wielecki shared in a phone interview with the Daily Wire. Quote, this has been bounced around by the scientific community for quite a while, that this kind of high emission scenarios were stress tests for the climate models, but somehow over time they became kind of the business as usual idea. They were the expected futures that a lot of policy was being made upon, he continued. And if you look at the last National Climate Assessment, NCA5, a lot of the impact statements, if not even the majority, in many chapters rely on these now implausible scenarios to kind of inform policymakers about how to respond to climate change. If your informed response is based on a scenario that's no longer plausible, you don't make good decisions, unquote. Marlo, I want to start with you. You know, this is very much up your alley as you've been doing climate policy for Competitive Enterprise Institute for a long, long time. But it struck me reading this that elections matter. And in this case, not electing a president who's obsessed by fake global climate doom and the false idea that humans can control the global climate puts actual science back in charge.
Oh, absolutely. This would not have happened but for the Trump presidency. And it's just wonderful. People have been showing that these high-end scenarios, the best known ones are RCP 8.5. The one that was actually used in the 5th National Climate Assessment was even more unrealistic. It was called SSP 8.5. And they basically assumed that the world during the 21st century would somehow burn through the equivalent of 2.6 times all proved fossil fuel reserves in the world. I mean, it's just nuts. So, not just all the coal, all the natural gas, all the oil that can be economically recovered, with current technologies at foreseeable prices, but 260% worth of that. And it had no reality ever. I mean, it was implausible from the get-go. If, for example, assumed peak oil, we all remember the great peak oil scare. These scenarios assumed that oil and gas would become so costly and so hard to extract that we would have to make gas for electric generation out of coal and liquid fuel out of coal instead of getting it from petroleum and natural gas. And so these were they were always preposterous scenarios. And people like good scientists like Roger Pilkey Jr. and several of his colleagues have been developing the data that shows that these things have no plausibility going all the way back to 2016. But the climate establishment was in denial. And so it took until now. They were basically shamed into admitting the lack of realism. So the new high-end scenario that's going to be in the next IPCC report has 53% less cumulative carbon dioxide emissions than SSP 8.5. So that's more than a half reduction in projected carbon dioxide emissions over the 21st century. The only thing that I would leave as a caveat is that our liberties are still not safe because they will still be using overheated models to run the emission scenarios. They will still have just ridiculously pessimistic adaptation assumptions that they operate under. For example, they will never acknowledge anywhere in an official climate assessment that the world is 99.9% safer from extreme weather than it was 150 years ago, and that this improvement has been going on at a rate of a tenfold improvement every 50 years since then. So that's business as usual. Business as usual is where always moving toward a safer climate, a more livable climate. That will never show up in the next IPCC report, I bet. That's my forecast. And then also, let's remember that there are so many knobs and dials in the models that they can use that even if they acknowledge that they're only going to be half or less than half the emissions that they told us were baked into the economy, only a few years ago, they can offset the emission reductions with other adjustments in parameters like climate sensitivity or, believe it or not, social fragility. They can argue, they have, that we are somehow more vulnerable to small increments in global warming, that society is more breakable, less resilient, when, of course, the long-term record shows that no, we are becoming less and less exposed to climate risk.
Marlo, I think what you're saying is true, but there's some good news in this to a degree. And I say not just that they walked it back, but I can't mistake why they're walking it back. You got Merz in Germany kind of walking back his climate assessments. You had Bezos famously kind of walking, and as well as Bill Gates walking back. This was kind of a cascading thing that I saw that the left was doing. And I think it was timed to a degree based on the fact of the realities that the green program at the time that, when Trump was first coming in was quite unpopular. And states like New York were struggling to try to provide electricity. Germany, of course, its Energiewende program went down. It's just not provided enough electricity for the country, and they have to seek options elsewhere, going back to coal or gas. And so I honestly think that, this walk back is giving the left some cover for kind of a reassessment or trying to make their program more sellable and not take the hits for now until the political climate changes going down the road, at which point they probably will come back with, like you said, something dealing with feedback or, other things that will probably once again say we got to take immediate action. So I think this was a step backwards, a reassessment, realizing they probably went too far with the voters.
Well, it to some extent, it was energy realism slapping him in the face. Remember, they stopped talking about climate change in the last election. They started talking about affordability. Now, what the people talking about it on the left meant by affordability was doubling down on the policies that created the problems that we face and calling it something else. It's no longer the Green New Deal. It's it's something else. We got to go for that. All the above, as long as all the above is just renewables and batteries. But at least they're marketing themselves differently. They're not climate warriors. They're energy abundance warriors. They're affordability warriors. I think Marlo's, what he said about this is probably the perfect, response. We're clearly more adaptable than we've ever been before. We're clearly in a better shape than we've ever been before. People are living longer. Fewer people are dying from temperatures because cold deaths are falling dramatically. Crops are growing dramatically. There's a lot of good news out there, but I want to go to one thing they keep coming back to. They hide, they cover their malfeasance, their absolute lying evil about 8.5 with the word implausible. You know what implausible means? It means, I'm reading the dictionary definition, not likely, something not probable or reasonable. It was never improbable. It was never unlikely. It was impossible. Something that's impossible is not unlikely. It's impossible. It can't happen. Why? Because there are not those coal reserves. We were not running out of the shortage of oil. The populations weren't almost double what present population, or 50% more than what present population is. None of the things the so-called improbable scenario that was treated as business as usual were. It's not that they were unlikely. It was that they could not exist. So they were lying from the start. Now, there were some honest researchers early in the years that said, don't use this as business as usual. This is the extreme scenario. But then they didn't complain when 10,000 and more peer-reviewed articles citing 8.5 as business as usual. They didn't say, how did that get past peer review? No, they quietly, shook their heads maybe in their ivory tower rooms, but they let it go. They let all these articles that were telling us how the world was ending because of the business as usual scenario, they let them get published. And as of yet, I haven't seen a single peer-reviewed journal withdraw those 10,000, those papers that they publish using this impossible scenario as the doom. In fact, some journals are still publishing papers using the scenario that even the IPCC has now admitted can't happen, folks. So, so many of the academics are bought and paid for because their careers are tied to the doom, and they need to find a new shtick.
Yeah, well, I love the comments by both Craig and Sterling, and I just want to say you're absolutely right, Sterling. Even I did not speak plainly enough. Yeah, it was impossible, and also this is a very important point, and it was brought out by Mr. Wailoki in his retraction of these scenarios from the U.S. Global Change Research Program. And it was that originally these scenarios, or not actually, it was just RCP 8.5 back in 2010 and 2011. It was just to stress test our models to see what happens in the most extreme case, what the models would project. But oh no, this is in no sense a socioeconomic projection of how the global economy is going to develop and the emissions that are. But if you look at even the original paper, there's an original paper that was called Riahi et al. 2011. They're already calling RCP 8.5 a baseline, and they're distinguishing it from the other scenarios as mitigation scenarios. And so the propaganda value of confusing the public and confusing the research community, or not confusing them, but deliberately blurring this distinction between an analytic tool and an actual projection of a possible future. The propaganda value of that was so obvious that it immediately was embraced as a projection of business as usual, of what will happen to the climate and the world if we just sit back and let it happen, because we won't adopt climate policies. Yeah. So, and as you say, this whole industry, which was funded to the tune of billions of dollars, all their careers then became bound up with this. And here's I actually checked Google Scholar this week, and basically 57,000 papers have been published over, since 2011 using RCP 8.5, and 22,000 papers have been published using SSP 2.5. Now, that means that the IPCC and the U.S. Global Change Research Program orchestrated the entire climate change literature. And then what they do, they sat back and purported to assess the consensus position of the literature that they themselves structured in advance. So it was really, the snake eating its tail here, a vicious circle, if you will.
I think that they kind of knew this, though. I mean, you had some journalists, like what was it, Brian Walsh of Vox or something like that, made the comment that they weren't fooled by this. They knew when they were reporting it that it was embellished, and what they were trying to do was to use this to promote public action. They just came out and said that. So this was not wool over the eyes. People were somehow mistaken and they were lied to. And no, this was willing, throw me into the briar patch type thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's what the late I'm blanking on his name, scientist said when he was interviewed by Discover all those years ago. We want to be honest, but to get action, he said, We want meaningful action. We want to have an impact. Steve Schneider. Yeah.
Right.
He said, you got to make up scary scenarios. You've got to play down any doubts you might have. He went through all these things you got to do to get meaningful action, which is not what science is about. Science is about informing people so they can decide what meaningful action is, not lying to them to get what you consider meaningful action.
Yep. It's the corruption of the whole scientific system, especially the peer review system. All of that, and it's all coming down little by little, which I actually like. We all do on this show for sure. All right, let's get to our next item here. We have an important story, obviously, the tragedy in Nepal to cover here as well. This item I've called Even Euro Greens Are Mum. We like to check out The Guardian every week to see what crazy climate news we can report from that alarmist communist newspaper. And here we found another one. Headline: Why are European leaders staying silent after our summer of climate shock? Lethal temperatures and wildfires have exposed a widening gulf between voters demanding action and politicians unwilling to confront the long-term choices global heating requires. All right, let me read a little bit of this. The climate crisis means, quote, we're going to have to change everything. The way we live, the way we produce, the way we trade. France's veteran radical left firebrand, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, told the Summer Congress of his French political party last weekend. The term climate change, said Mélenchon, the most likely rival to Marie Le Pen in next year's presidential runoff, according to one poll this week, may sound, quote, almost reassuring, but its actual impact will feel like, quote, landing on another planet whenever we leave home. The speech is notable because despite the 4 heat waves that have scorched Europe this summer, shattering temperature records, fanning unprecedented fires, and causing thousands of excess deaths, few politicians want to talk about climate action. Europe is the world's fastest warming continent, heating up twice as quickly as elsewhere. The consequences, as UN climate chief Simon Stiles put it, are, quote, reaching national emergency levels. And yet, major policy speeches by Europe's political leaders addressing the climate crisis, making plain its causes, and laying out the changes that will be needed to live with it can be counted on the fingers of one hand. A mid-July Ipsos poll found environment protection had jumped 12 points from June to become French voters' 4th greatest concern after what the pollster described as, quote, a first real experience of what the hell of a significantly hotter world might look like, unquote. In the UK, too, Labour Party activists worry that despite the ever more visible impacts of the climate crisis, there has been no major political push from the government on the issue, even as voters become increasingly convinced for the need for action. And while Friedrich Merz said this week that action was needed to, quote, curb climate change and adapt to the consequences, though not at a cost to German industry, he's been accused all summer of ducking the issue for fear of boosting the climate skeptic far-right AFD. All right, that's enough. Thank you very much, Commie Guardian. Craig.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
100%. Craig, on this program we've covered, or at least mentioned, actually just a show or two ago, that climate change is dead last or next to last on the issues of concern to American voters. The Guardian seems to think that climate action being number 4 is good progress. What do you think?
Yeah, I just had we were just together with James Taylor of Heartland Institute over in Europe a couple months back doing a joint conference with a group called IKE. And at that particular time, there were some elections held in Germany, and the AFD party was gaining in, prominence. We had some people over from England with the Reform Party. The skeptics have been making gains in Europe for some time. This despite. Now, of course, you would think, and we found those who have been in this movement for a long time, support or concern about climate change usually changes with the weather. When things are unusual or hot, then people tend to all of a sudden go, oh yeah, climate change, but they quickly forget it the minute it moderates out. So I think what is happening in Europe, and it's certainly happened in the United States, they're looking at internal polling and the like. In the United States, I saw a recent poll recently where it was something around 14%, or the 14th biggest issue in voters' minds. I've seen other ones where it's 19th. out of like 20. So it's very, very low. Only 3% of American voters, for example, really value climate as something they think about when they go into the voting booth. So I think that though people are upset, and you're getting these articles like in the Guardian saying, voters care about, I think they're trying to gin up more than they are actually reading accurately what the voters say. There's no question people are concerned about climate change because they don't have air conditioning. So that's a simple solution for it. But I don't know as though it's one of these issues that's, bedrock issue like the economy, like immigration and other things that seem to be playing well to the parties that aren't emphasizing climate change, like the AFD and others, to which both the president of Heartland and myself have been invited to speak to this coming November. So I see actually just the opposite happening in Europe, that the parties that are skeptical of climate change seem to be growing in power, while those who have embraced it and ruined their economies and went down the road of energy agenda, wind power, all this sort of thing, are paying the price for it.
I guess I want to step away from the politics and the polling to talk about some of the underlying claims made in the article, which is they're seeing extremes they've never seen before. And it's a clear sign that climate change is occurring as opposed to weather. For it to be climate change, you'd have to have a trend line, long-term trend. 30 years is how meteorologists typically measure changes in climate. And yet there is no long-term trend. There are spikes, and there was a spike this year, no question. Right now, it's cooler than average in Iberia. It's cooler in Ukraine. It's cooler in Russia. In fact, it's been cooler in Russia for much of the summer and parts of Eastern Europe. No one talks about that. The Arctic is colder than it's been in a decade, 12 years, setting records. South America is covered with snow. Parts of the southern South America, roads have been closed. They were closed in one area for a month because of snow and cold. No one's talking about that. They talk about one small location. Look, Europe is not that big. Europe is not the world. It's one small location, and it was hot there. But that's not climate, that's weather. There's no evidence that floods are outside their historic bounds, or droughts are outside their historic bounds, or even temperatures are outside their historic bounds. Some locations measure hotter temperatures than they've measured before. I'll wager a lot of those locations are major metropolitan areas that are suffering from the urban heat island effect. But what you're not seeing is long-term trends. And rather than focus on data, they want to focus on anecdotes. And that's what the Guardian is genius at doing that. Give them credit where credit's due. They're genius at ginning up fear based on anecdotal evidence. One bad summer makes it climate change is killing people, and it's only going to get worse. That's not science. That's rhetoric.
You sit on a throne of lies.
Yeah, Sterling is absolutely right about this. I remember when Al Gore tried to make a mountain out of the anecdotal molehill of the biggest downpour in Mumbai, India's history over, a 70-year period or something. It was in July, and I actually crunched the numbers and looked at rainfall in July in Mumbai, India, going back, I think it was 75 years, and there was simply no trend at all. So it was just, 1 year where you had 6 more inches of rain in one day than you ever had, in the previous record-setting rainfall, which was already pretty high. It was over 100 inches, 50 years before. I don't remember the specific dates, but, there was a similar case. Jim Hansen tried to make, James Hansen, the famous climate scientist who really helped launch the bonfire of the climate vanities in his great Senate testimony in 1988, arranged by Al Gore. And he tried to ascribe the 2003 heat wave that killed thousands of people in France to global warming. And I was at a meeting that he was at, and I came prepared with a heat map of the world. All right. And almost all of the rest of the world was colored blue and green, indicating that it was cooler than usual. The only place in the world that was red was France. And so how you could attribute the French warming, which was really due to an atmospheric blocking phenomenon. In other words, there was no way for the hot air to move away from France. That's why it was so damn hot. You couldn't get any rainfall to cool things down. And how you could say that this little tiny blip of red was due to global warming when most of the world was blue and green on the heat map, you know. And he didn't have a response to me. He just said the statistics prove that he's right.
And how many times have we brought up the medieval warming period or the Roman warming period, and they said that's a regional one. So they know better. They know that that one, even though there's lots of evidence to suggest that that was global, they tend to isolate that and say, no, we only have evidence in Europe that wasn't global. Now, meanwhile, we have a lot of evidence, like Sterling said, that this is mostly something that's occurring in Europe and a few other places. And no, in that case, or in the case of France, as you mentioned, that represents the entire world, what's happening in France. So they play both ways.
It's more than 20 years after the 2003 hurricane heat wave, and they still don't have air conditioning because they still think it's Yankee and gauche, you know? Some people never learn.
Right.
Einstein said it. One definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yep. Yes. Well, I mean, I just really enjoy keeping an eye on leftist publications like The Guardian, lamenting, panicking almost, that nobody's talking about climate change anymore, that it's not a winning political issue. Well, too bad. It's a loser, and people are finally waking up in Europe, of all places, and that is something to celebrate. All right, let's move on to
Austin Powers references. I like those for the other side. They really kind of fit the mold there. So kudos to whoever's doing the production of this thing.
Thank you much. Anyway, so those were the fun items in our crazy climate news of the week, and they often are very fun, but this is the main topic for today, which we put off to the end. Actually, I'm glad we did that now. I'm waiting for Sterling Burnett to arrive. So, we all know about what happened at the Nepal-Tibet border on Wednesday. Horrible, horrible tragedy. Horrifying when you see the clips. And Andy, you can go ahead and run some clips with the sound off. But, just for background here, on Wednesday, a glacial collapse triggered a catastrophic flash flooding along the Nepal-Tibet border. A large ice and rock mass sheared off a high glacier and plunged more than a kilometer into a valley. The avalanche then registered a magnitude of 5.2 as a seismic event, and then sent a surge of water, mud, ice, and boulders down the Bote Koshi and Trishuli rivers. What is called a glacial lake outburst flood. Officials say hundreds were killed and more than 1,000 remain missing. I think those numbers are going to skyrocket. I mean, you look at these, if you're watching the stream, you can see these videos that we've collected. It's like something out of a disaster movie. You see these little tiny figures running away from a catastrophe that is literally bigger than buildings. It's just horrifying how that happened to these poor people. Of course, part of this now, and this is why we're covering this, it's the biggest story in the world right now, but we're also covering it because, unfortunately, the legacy media is quick to blame climate change and global warming caused by human carbon dioxide emissions for this horrible tragedy. The Washington Post said, quote, "It is a harbinger of the dangers posed by melting ice in a warming world," unquote. The New York Times, to its credit, at least in the story I had read yesterday, was a little bit more balanced. They said, quote, "Warming temperatures caused by climate change may have destabilized," the rock-faced scientist said, but they added that it was too early to determine a precise cause, unquote. So very rare that I praise the New York Times for balance, but there you go. Others, especially on social media, were not quite as cautious. It came across, I think, via our friend Steve Malloy, friend of the show, and of Heartland Institute. There was an ex post by a Nepalese scientist called Nirmal Kandal, and he wrote, in part, he says, "This is climate injustice in its rawest form. Pictures speak for itself. The so-called developed world burned carbon for generations, built wealth from it, and called it progress. Now countries like Nepal, which contributed almost nothing to the historical climate crisis, are being told to become resilient while glaciers melt, glacial lakes burst, homes disappear, and communities pay the bill." And we're going to wrap up our synopsis of typical legacy media coverage of this horrible catastrophe with a clip from CNN. And Sterling, I'm probably going to start with you to react to that. So can you play that, Andy?
We know, and let's talk about the cascading hazards that this area is so prone to. We know that this is the monsoon season across Nepal. We know that August is in the height of summer. We've got thousands of glaciers that line the Himalayas across this area. And this part of the world, because of climate change, is warming 2 times faster than the global average. So what that's doing is accelerating the loss of ice from these glaciers. And what that's doing is causing, or at least creating, these glacial lakes in some very precarious positions high into the mountains of the Himalayas. Now, this is kind of a pool of water, right, that is often formed by these melting glaciers, but it can also be filled by the excessive rain from the monsoon season. So these cascading effects, not to mention an earthquake that was registered in and around the location of this disaster, could have added to this river being dammed up, these glacial lake outbursts, this potential of a glacial lake outburst just being exacerbated because of these culminating problems that puts over 2 million people at risk that live in the valleys below across this part of the Nepal and China border. Now, ice loss here since the year 2000 has doubled. So that is one of the concerns here. So when we think about the earthquake that was located right about there, if there was any kind of debris, we're talking ice, we're talking about rock that's been destabilized from the increase in temperatures, the fact that it's still monsoon season and it's likely rained across this area, that obviously destabilizes the ground, and any of that rock and debris falling into the rivers and the gorges below can easily dam up that water. So if we have a glacial lake outburst, if this is indeed the problem, indeed the cause of this deadly flooding, it was made worse by this melt-off from glaciers thanks to monsoon rains, the increased temperatures across the planet, this area warming twice as fast. These are the culminating factors that can lead to these disasters. We've seen it time and time again, a glacial lake outburst that happened last year, similar effects, devastating impacts. And it is very, very scary to not only see these videos, but to live at the base of these towering behemoth mountains.
Now, Sterling, that was recorded on Wednesday. A lot of what he said in there, I think we've discovered through the news that we've seen today is wrong. There was no earthquake, apparently. It was the event itself that caused the seismic recording. But I still bring it up, even though we know some of that is not true definitively, that CNN didn't waste any time getting out there and exploiting this catastrophe to blame it ultimately on us, on human activity causing the globe to warm.
Yeah, well, you look, it's the same thing they do with guns when there's a shooting. Well, the guns are the problem. You got to have gun control. Well, here it's something bad happened. Climate change is the problem. We've got to restrict human greenhouse gas emissions. You're right. CNN did what Washington Post and other media sources did, which is jump the gun, which they are prone to do. I'm surprised we don't have an attribution study already produced saying this was made 100 times more likely due to climate change. I haven't seen that yet, but hold on to your hats. But what was interesting about what he said is he listed all the factors that Nepal and Tibet are prone to. Monsoons with heavy rains, repeated flooding that kills people, you know, all these things, long-term decline in some glaciers. And the glaciers are a water source for these communities. There is no, I don't believe, I've never been in Nepal, but I don't believe there's any place in Nepal that's comparable to Kansas or Nebraska, sort of flat. Everyone lives in very narrow, relatively narrow mountain valleys. So when these things occur, it's terrible. I suppose the answer is not for me to stop driving my car, but for them to start building up the sides of these mountains rather than right along a river that has repeatedly flooded with tragic events, that is in a country that's known for monsoon rains every year, unless they have a low monsoon rain season, in which case they can't grow their crops and they blame climate change. The point is, a lot of factors went into this. The cause of this particular thing was probably a glacier breaking off, snapping off, and hitting a stored water, a backed up glacial lake that caused flooding, like what happens when all dams break. Maybe what they should do is do what some people do with beaver ponds when you want a flowing river, is you go break it up in advance. You don't let things build up and then be surprised when those things that built up that aren't stable burst. In the end, it's a tragedy for these people. We need to get in there and help them as much as possible. Aid is merited, but let's not pretend that there is a sign of climate change. There's a sign of weather there, and it's not something that hasn't happened before.
Yeah, and this was a rock ice cliff that broke off. And so some part of one of the factors, or two factors here, might be geologic and also glaciological. Ice is not steel. And there are there are instabilities in rocky cliffs. So a definitive attribution has not been made here, and yet, as you point out, the media, or certain parts of the media, were quick to attribute this to climate change. And then you have to ask the question: well, okay, what should we do about this in the future? If we had actually had a net zero program in effect, over the last 20 years, well, we wouldn't have, because the whole idea of net zero by 2050 was really only articulated officially in 2018, October 2018. So it's not even 10 years since that goal was held up as the safe, policy. But we know that, for example, if the United States went to net zero today, that the impact on global temperatures by 2100 would be less than 0.2 of a degree. Does anyone think that if the world were much less than 0.2 of a degree warmer, or rather would be much less than 0.2 of a degree cooler today, that this wouldn't have happened? I mean, even if you assume that climate change was a factor. So they will always try to milk it for the propaganda value to advance an agenda, which costs a lot and accomplishes nothing.
Yeah, I mean, Craig, that's Marlo, excellent point. I mean, that's kind of the implication here. Sometimes it's not implied; it's just specifically stated that. Let's just say that we stopped using fossil fuels in 1990, or this would have been prevented because climate change is causing this. On the other hand, of course, the globe is warmer today. I would have to look up Nepal's historic temperatures, or in that particular valley. But yeah, there isn't a single climate realist that comes on this program that would dispute that the Earth is warmer today than it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so, yes, warming climate, you're going to have more glacial melt than you would otherwise. Those are all true, but that does not mean that if we had basically put ourselves back into the Stone Age as far as advancement and not burning carbon dioxide and not using fossil fuels, that this would never have happened. that is the really, I think, offensive thing about the media coverage on this. And this is just starting. This is going to get worse, I think, as we go forward.
You're right. I mean, I kind of, I thought one of the comments in the side here, somebody Google world weather attribution. The study probably came out during the show that occurred at CNN. I thought that was clever. We actually have seen the Himalayas manipulated in the past by climate alarmists. I'm old enough to remember back in 2007, they had about a study came out that made its way into the IPCC's fourth assessment report, talking about rapid melting of ice in the Himalayas, and it wound up being discredited and pulled out in 2010 because it was done by, a young college student who didn't even have a degree or something like that. So they've targeted this for quite some time, looking at this region. And, you can actually, one of the problems that you find in this area of the world is that there isn't a lot of real solid historical data about things that go back. We know, for example, and you can actually, AI this if you want to, but there was one of these similar type of glacial lake outburst floods that was quite catastrophic in 1921. There was another one in 1935. They don't always happen in monsoon season. I think in 1985, there was also one, and they've occurred in different months. Sometimes they're in June, sometimes September, which could be monsoon. But they come at different times, but certainly during the monsoon, it seems to be more prone to do this. And in each of these cases that some predate when climate change could happen, there were literally hundreds of deaths that occurred in these things. This is partially a result of better reporting today. We don't have a lot of great historical data because if you go back in the past, it was handled by word of mouth. But now we have global satellites. We can see these things in real time. We can see people. This film that we saw, horrific filming, wouldn't have been possible back in 1921. So I think it's being brought here. People are seeing it a lot of times for the first time. There probably aren't a lot of people alive that were around back in 35 and 21 to even remember what was going on. So it's horrific. But there was one even as recent as 2021, that occurred similarly in this region. And I think a lot of the idea that this is getting worse and worse can be challenged to a degree. It might be as there's warming, but I'm a little suspicious given the Green Left's history of looking at this issue in the past, manipulating data as far back as 2007 as to what I don't think the case can be made quite yet that this is something that is escalating in rapidity and commonality, and we're seeing it more and more. I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just saying I don't know as though I've seen something that would convince me of that quite yet.
Yeah, caution is always warranted. I would say this. What we do know is that this century and a half is warm. We came out of something called the Little Ice Age. And as Craig rightly points out, we don't have the kinds of detailed data from the Little Ice Age that we have now. The technology just didn't exist. The coverage didn't exist. But what we know from historical records, from word of mouth, is that glaciers then were expanding. And gosh, that wasn't good for Nepal and Tibet either. Or in the Swiss Alps, where they've got pictures of woodcuts, where the glaciers are coming down and wiping out whole villages. And that wasn't a good thing. And now those villages and trails and roads that were in common use in the past are becoming uncovered. But that means they were used there before. They had been uncovered before. And there's evidence that glaciers have expanded and retreated for the past 15,000 years, 12,000 years since the end of the last ice age. Until the next ice age comes, that's going to be the case.
That's right. And, Craig, I'm glad you brought up that study from the fourth assessment report. I was racking my brains to try to remember some specifics about it. And it was yanked. One reason was that it was never peer reviewed. They got it from some, as you say, it was some other it wasn't peer reviewed data, which was supposed to be used only in IPCC reports. But the irony, of course, was that then the big fear was that the glaciers would melt and there would be no more water. You know, it wasn't the superabundance of water that they were worried about, but the lack of it. That basically that the water supplies would dry up in the Himalayas.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, I just think we have caution on this. I know we at CFACT, and I'm sure Heartland's doing the same, as is CO2 and CEI and others. We're going to be reviewing this situation, and we'll probably be producing something more authoritative. Unlike the people on CNN and some of the media outlets that jump to conclusions, we will make sure that whatever we put out has been vetted by the type of people that we think would be able to spot what the data actually says.
Yeah, this tragedy is barely 48 hours old. It's I had to stop myself from doom scrolling on X. I just had to put my phone down, turn it off, and go for a walk, because you just get obsessed with it, and it's just the scale of human tragedy of this is hard to actually put your head around. But our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Nepal and everyone around the world who cares about them. I know the world will be with you. There's a long recovery coming, but we are going, and we don't even really know. We won't know for a while definitively exactly what happened, but I think we will find out at one point. And we'll be here to report that. But we thought it was really important on this show to at least look at the way the mainstream media is already trying to exploit one of the worst tragedies of the 21st century for ideological ends. I want to lighten it up now. That all being said, we have one of Anthony Watts, the regular on this program, one of his favorite things. He's always like, we should do more memes. We need memes of the week. It lightens things up. It's like, all right, well, we're going to do it this week. Anthony, when you're watching this, sorry you missed it, but we're going to put a couple up here that I thought were pretty interesting. The first one, actually, this is from Steve Malloy. He noted that what's melting is, he says, what's melting? Washington Post deprioritizes climate by removing it from its top menu bar, and app default. Climate has been reduced to an optional ad, like it's kin in the comics. And then if you can go to the next slide, Andy, we can see here on Tuesday. I don't think you should diss the
comics like that. I think the comics are actually
yeah. Don't run down comics like that, Steve. We'll get you on that next time you're on the show. But as we researched it here on Tuesday, climate was right there on the top of the bar, and then on Wednesday it's gone. So yet another sign that perhaps our side is winning. Interesting. Maybe that's because the funding for their climate desk has also dried up, so maybe they just don't even want to bother with it anymore. And then lastly here, of course, we see that what a coincidence. So the great Dolly Parton passed away at the age of 80 this week, and the very week that she passes away, a tropical storm rises in the Atlantic, and just so happens that the very next name on the list for which this storm has been named is none other than Dolly. That's, I don't know. I think Dolly's looking down on heaven and smiling and maybe admiring God's work of that storm in the Atlantic. But what a strange coincidence. And actually, what a great tribute to a great American and an American original. So very interesting. I thought if you didn't know that'd be interesting to share with people. But everybody loved Dolly Parton. I mean, she was sweet, she was genuine, she was supremely talented. She was a movie star. She was an entrepreneur. I mean, she was whip smart, and she really, really knew how to make money. And not just because of all the gold records that she accumulated. Now, I don't know about what her opinion would have been about buying gold, but I can tell you that the sponsor of this program thinks that buying gold is a good idea for you. In fact, he likes to say, don't wait to buy gold, but buy gold and wait. And that sponsor is the sponsor of this program, Advisor Metals. If you're like me and you listen to a lot of conservative shows that are streaming out there, you hear tons of pitches for buying gold, silver, and other precious metals. There are so many companies out there, but we want to tell you why you should trust the sponsor of this program, Advisor Metals, and that's because of the man who runs the company, and his name is Ira Bershatsky. Ira and I were actually talking via email, actually emailing the other day. And he said that historically, gold performs best in September and in January, while the stock market is usually lower in September and October. So that now might be a great time for you to buy precious metals. And in fact, 4 years ago, at about the time we started this program, the Climate Realism Show, we called it Climate Change Roundtable, I think, to start. But at the time we started this program, gold was at about $1,700 an ounce, silver was $18 an ounce, and platinum was $882 an ounce. Since this program started 4 years ago, platinum is up 109%, gold is up 164%, and silver is up 265%. As Ira says, don't wait to buy gold and wait. I also want to mention that Ira is advertising on this program because he is an America First patriot. He doesn't donate to Democrats. He refuses to work with the proxies of the Chinese Communist Party. And he, like us, abhor the machinations and schemes of organizations like the World Economic Forum. And that is why we are so proud to have IRA and Advisor Metals as a sponsor. So if you want to diversify your investment portfolio, if you want to back up your IRA with real physical bullion of precious metals, please today go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. You can leave your information there, and Ira's going to make the whole process very easy for you. Again, it's climaterealismshow.com/metals. And be sure to tell them who sent you, because that helps us and this program while you're helping your financial future. All right. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And we're going to get to one of my favorite segments of this program, because I usually get to sit back and take a break, and that's the Q&A, but I have to handle Q&A today because Linnea is not here. So let's get going with that. Yeah, I make it harder for you to interrupt me while I'm speaking to do that drop like you do with Linnea. So good for me, I guess. All right. Let's see. I have to go through these questions just like Linnea does. Well, I mean, we just talked about this. BBC, I didn't notice the BBC's coverage of this, but it says Albert Van Lingen, 77590. BBC claims the Nepal landslide was caused by global warming. Question: true or false? Undetermined, I think. I mean,
answer
like,
we don't
I
know.
say, you guys might want to weigh in or not. We can move on, but has the Earth warmed in the last 30 years? Yes. Does that mean glaciers will melt more? Yeah, in most places, correct. Do glaciers always stand in place? Are they designed? Are they supposed to just stay where they are, the exact same ice mass forever? No, that's not how glaciers work.
I think the important thing is I doubt it could have been prevented if we had banned every SUV in the country, or had gotten rid of all of our air conditioning and had gone to solar and wind power. The Earth is naturally warming, and what man's impact on that is, it's a tough call. And for a scientist to actually make the claim in any way, shape, or form that this is linked to somehow man's activities, I think would be a stretch.
For sure. All right. Another Nepal-related question. More of a comment, really, but it's a very sad day for Nepal. How do the alarmists think these valleys were made in the first place? By many events of this nature. That's how. In one of the videos there, Sterling, it was kind of a before and after picture of the border crossing station between Tibet and Nepal, and it's all gone. And that's at least 5 stories building, and it's over top of that. I mean, this is how nature is. This is how nature creates itself.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I saw that video several times yesterday. Honestly, I repeated it multiple times because I've just never seen, honestly, anything. I've seen hurricane coverage and stuff, but this just black wave going over the top of a very significant building. It was amazing to me. I did not know that was the border crossing building. But the person that asked this question is right. Look. How were these valleys? They're glacial valleys. How were they formed? Well, continental uplift and ice expanding and retreating over millennia. Just like we have glacial moraines and valleys here in the United States. That's how mountain chasms are often formed, or river activity, which there is a combination, right? The glaciers melt, they feed the rivers, glacial melt feeds the river, and it wears away the rocks.
All right.
I would add to that, though, a lot of people that live in these valleys, Sterling, if you read I've read a couple of the ones from the distant past where the accounts were given by, they were just normals, people that were goat herders kind of, or whatever they were raising out there.
Yaks.
Whatever. Yeah. So they were being chased by Yetis and they went into the mountains. Anyway, the bottom line is that they didn't necessarily know the history. They expect flooding, and when something floods, then they move. So it's not necessarily that this is entirely an accident. Some of the people just, one generation to the next, and they realize that's a danger.
Yep. All right. Again, if you have questions here as we get near the end of the show, go ahead and put them in the comments and see if we can get to them.
I did want to say that I did think naming a storm after Dolly is good. I mean, hurricane after Dolly, because she did take the music world by storm. So
very good. Obviously, coincidence though. They set the names of the storms way before the season even begins, so it's actually pretty crazy coincidence. All right, here we have a question from Sammy the Smooth. Why is there a high suicide rates in cold countries and areas? Asking for a friend. I think his point, guys, is that this leads to, this was from one of the stories we read about how global warming is causing child abuse. How come nobody ever talks about how it may be true that higher suicide rates occur in colder areas, so that global warming is actually preventing suicides? We can play this game all day, yeah?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. I'm not sure that it's necessarily the cold in some countries that are contributing to people deciding to take their lives. Yeah, it's the darkness. It's the lack of sunlight. And that's why in a lot of those countries, they actually have sort of what they call sunlight therapy, where you sit under a sun lamp for an extended period of time every day to relieve depression.
All right. Next question here from DJ Bo, a very frequent visitor to our live stream. Thank you very much, DJ. Question: a recent trend is for alarmists to call the Dust Bowl local. What data can we use to respond to that claim? And before you guys get into that, I know that Chris Martz, who is with CFACT, your organization, Craig, I believe he's working on a paper that is studying the Dust Bowl. So when that's completed, we're going to have him on this program to talk about it.
No, you just gave my answer there. Very well, Jim. I was going to say I will be able to answer that question probably fairly soon when one of our staffers actually produces a report on just that question. So
there he is. Oh, he is there. Hey, Chris. Yep, we're gonna have you. We're gonna have you on to talk about that before too long. That's very interesting. I know you've been working on that. Let's see.
Well, I'll say this: the Dust Bowl wasn't. I guess it depends on what you mean by local. It was regional in the center of the United States, and you had a coincidence of a drought, but you also had something that you didn't have in a lot of countries, or you had centuries earlier in a lot of countries. Industrial agriculture had started there, and it took away a lot of the topsoil. We plowed grasslands, and we farmed intensively, and we washed away a lot of topsoil, and that created the Dust Bowl conditions when the drought came.
All right. We have time for a couple more here, I think. Let's see. Well, I mean, this is just... Let's see. Oops. Oh, that's the wrong... Oh, let's see. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You guys just put that up there instead of me? Okay, yeah. Real Chris Marr says, long story short, Dust Bowl refers to area affected by dust storms. Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, Southwest Kansas, East Colorado. You got to put a spoiler alert on that stuff, Chris. We're going to get to that later. It has nothing to do with the drought or heat waves across North America during the decade. Yep. Yep. I think I know a little bit about the Dust Bowl, but I can't wait to learn more about it. And you guys are going to want to tune into the show when we have Chris on to talk about it. Mm-hmm. This is a little tongue in cheek, but Mike Gattuso asks, I wonder how much electricity we can save if we just stop doing global warming attribution studies. Or we can require them to do it by candlelight.
There you go. And typewriters.
Or whale oil lamps. All sorts of things.
You can have you can have monks and priests copy each study by hand over and over again to distribute them, rather than using even a linotype machine or one of the old the machines that left all the blue ink, mimeograph machines. Yeah, because the mimeograph machines took electricity.
And let's distribute them by Pony Express.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, a couple more questions here. This is, again, a longtime frequent viewer, Chris Nisbet. Thank you so much. I wonder what alarmists imagine a net zero world would look like. I imagine mud huts and short lives. Do they imagine invisible wind turbines and nectar?
Well, they certainly, when we were looking at this and we made our movie Climate Monarchy, I don't think that a lot of the people pushing this agenda necessarily see themselves in mud huts and living short lives. I think they see the people to which they feel that they would, govern over living that way. I mean, and the reason for this, having been to like 27 of the 30 UN climate conferences, I can tell you they eat red meat at these conferences. They take private limos, private jets. They do not live a net zero lifestyle at all. So, yes, I think for the greater part of humanity, shove them in 15-minute cities and take public transportation. But no, not for the people that the haves. That's only for the have-nots.
Yeah, it's for them. It's a land of milk and honey with a lot fewer people. That I've seen as low. I saw one philosopher, Arnie Nice, said the ideal human population of the Earth was 200 million people. Think about
Jacques Cousteau, the old oceanographer, used to say 500 million. So
there you go. And then but regardless of it's 200, 500, a billion, 2 billion, a lot lower than it is right now. And the only question is, they never want to talk about how we get there. How do we get there? I think they have some ideas about how to get there.
Again, Ted Turner had the idea of cannibalism. I always thought that was my personal favorite.
Well, look, Soylent Green is people.
Yeah, we might have to have a special, climate dystopia. Is it real or was it predicted contest on this program? Actually, I think that should be pretty fun.
And by the way, it's Soylent Green, so it's green.
Right?
They're saying it's green.
Good for the planet. All right. And then the last question here is, why is Linnea in Israel and not in the Maldives? Maybe sea level rise? Again, Linnea, she will be back the next time we broadcast the Climate Realism Show, which I have to say, unfortunately, will not be next Friday. Next Friday, we have to take yet another 1-week hiatus. The Heartland Institute's 42nd anniversary benefit dinner is on Thursday, September 3rd. So that means Friday, September 4th, we're actually doing a little retreat for everybody at the Heartland Institute. So we're going to miss it. I know we're going to miss you too, but we will be back the following week. As we close here, I just want to thank our special guests, Craig Rucker. He's the president of CFACT, and Marlo Lewis. It's not his first time on the program, and it also won't be his last time on the program, and he's a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Thank you so much, Sterling Burnett, and thank you, our audience, for being here with us live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I want to thank again our streaming partners, Junk Science, CFACT, the CO2 Coalition, Climate Depot, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. Thank you very much, Andy Singer and Silas Pearson in the background, producing this show so beautifully today. Always visit climaterealism.com, climateataglance.com, energyataglance.com, and heartland.org. Those are all fantastic websites run by us that give you the information you need every day to counter climate alarmism. We will see you again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.